I tell you, before this gets heated, I mean, let's hope it does get more heated. I just get a final, perhaps, word from you, Professor. I mean, coming from Tehran, how did you see the Western media? Did you think that it actually tried to discover what was really going on, the complexities of Iranian politics?
Not really. I think that in the West, there's been a hostility towards Iran since the revolution itself. And I think that has existed throughout the last 30 years. If you, for example, go to the BBC website, the English website, and look up Iran, out of every 20 reports or articles, I can assure you almost all 20 will be negative. And therefore, if a person reads about Iran in the West, it's obviously a very backward, barbaric, undemocratic country. Whereas you don't get the same sort of image when you read about Bahrain, or when you read about Jordan or Egypt, which are allies of the United States and Britain, or the Emirates, which is a complete dictatorship. Now, when my good colleague here said 98% of Iranians are dissatisfied, I think that's a bit unfair. Of course, dissatisfaction is something that all of us have in life. I mean, 100% of all people are dissatisfied. I don't think there are many people out there in the world who are satisfied. But when you look at this election, nearly 40 million people voted. Now, we can discuss the outcome of the election later on, but large numbers voted for the different candidates, especially the two main candidates. And therefore, you can't say that 98% were dissatisfied because, in the broader sense, because they voted for these people. Now, the English media, from the very start, regardless of whether there was fraud or not, that's something we can cover a bit later, but I just want to point out a couple of things, and that is the media, the Western media, basically assumed fraud from the very start, because that is the thing that is expected from a country like Iran. It's always the negative. And then everything starts from there. Now, the Persian media, BBC Persian, VOA television, and the tens of television stations broadcast from the United States in Persian beamed into Iran, many of them have been inciting violence in the country. And I think that that is something not only disturbing, but criminal. And if we speak about, let's say, an open society, well, look, you have tens of channels beaming into the country, Iran, which they are destabilizing, many of them, or at least potentially, and they're funded by foreign powers. But look at the United States. You have a television channel called Al-Manar, which belongs to Hezbollah, right? It is banned in the United States. If someone helps anyone to watch that program in the United States, an Arabic news channel which no one can understand in the United States, maybe 1/10 of 1%, you can go to jail for 15 years, and people have been sentenced to jail for watching Al-Manar.
Is Iran an exception, therefore, with so many foreign powers beaming its messages into Iran, that it actually is unable to have a kind of legitimate election on its own terms, Tim?
Well, I haven't heard any evidence about this inciting to violence, and I don't, we haven't produced any. That certainly isn't the role of the mainstream television stations, the mainstream radio stations, and I'd like to pick him up on one point, which I can't let you get away with this. It wasn't the Western media who yelled fraud after the election. Western media has been very careful about talking about fraud. It's been very balanced about it. It said questions have been raised about fraud. It was Mousavi himself who called it fraud. It was an Iranian. It was the leading opposition candidate who called it fraud, and we reported him. So don't blame something that an Iranian said on the Western media.
Can I also make
Excuse me, may I just
Paul, just
you said
Professor, come quickly back on that, and then we'll come to you, Paul.
I didn't say anything about the West saying first that it was fraud. I'm saying that in the West, the assumption from the very start is a negative one. Otherwise, obviously, that's the complaint that Mr. Mousavi said.
That's not what I read in the newspapers. I read balanced reporting, predicting what the outcome might be, that there was a lot of feeling in favor of the opposition. There have been these rallies. but that it could be a tight-run election. I didn't see anybody inciting anybody to do anything,
well, you have,
assuming it was going to be fraud.
What I was speaking about,
it's all in your minds, not in what we say.
Do you understand? I mean, do you watch Persian television, satellite television?
I don't. I can't.
Well, then how? Then why do you say it's all in my mind when you do not have the ability to
watch it yourself? Paul, quickly, last word.
2 points. First of all, the idea about negative attitudes towards Iran. There was a tremendous sense of optimism when Barack Obama came in. There was tremendous sense of hope that he was reaching out not only to the Middle East, but particularly to Iran. And there was a feeling amongst all people of goodwill that this is a chance to work with Iran, to talk to Iran. I felt a tremendous sense of optimism. And what has happened, this suppression and this paranoia about Western interference rather than resolving domestic problems, has completely destroyed. That's so sad. Secondly, in terms of looking at exactly what the television stations have been saying coming from Tehran, if you look at the BBC monitoring system, unless you say they mistranslate, you might get paranoid enough to say that. But I've been looking at that. And what they say about John Simpson, my friends Lindsay Hilsum, Jon Snow, I mean, it's highly defamatory. They've been putting pictures up and saying this is what they said, this is what they said, and it's complete lies. And that's the reason why some of the mainstream journalists wouldn't appear on this program, because of the constant defamation of the television stations in Tehran.
Paul, before we carry on that, let's step back, Masood, just briefly. And in fact, we need to just throw a question to the audience. But I think we just want to look at the evidence, whether the election was actually rigged or not. And I think we have a question from Chris Fernandez. Chris, are you... There you are. Hello, Chris. Yeah, please, put your question.
The fact of the matter that Iranian did have a domestic problem after the election. If the counting was clean, why the appropriate authority ordered only 10% recount? And is that a logical solution, constitutional solution, or just a whitewash?
Yeah, so, Professor, what would you say to that? Why just 10% when they could have had a full recount?
Right, well, let me very briefly explain how the electoral process works. Each person who votes, they have to submit their ID card, and their information is put on a computer database. And they fingerprint the stub of their ballot. And then they put the ballot they write down the name and put it in the ballot box. Now, roughly 700,000 people are involved in the electoral process, and at each ballot box there are 14 people. There are a number of ways in which they count the votes. One is each ballot box at the polling station, after they're finished, they count the votes there and send it directly to the Ministry of the Interior for a final count. And then there's a second way where they send it to a center where a number of ballot boxes are counted together, their votes, and then sent. So, and then they compare these votes. And then you also have the representatives of the different candidates at the ballot box. Now, after the election, and I didn't vote for either of the two major candidates, by the way, but after the election, when the complaint of fraud came out, and Mr. Mousavi said that there was fraud, the leader said, I am not going to cancel the elections, because he said everything has to go through the constitutional process. And that is, if they have a complaint, it has to go to the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council said that we will recount 10% of the ballot boxes at random to see if there's any major problem, it will come out, and then we'll do a general recount. Now, Mr. Mousavi said, no, this is not enough. And he also said that he doesn't accept the Guardian Council. What happened next was they assigned a special committee of 6 people of, let's say, senior social figures in Iran. One of them was the foreign minister of Mr. Mousavi during his 8 years of when he was the premier of the country, the prime minister, and 5 other people. And they said that what we will do, they sort of spoke to Mr. Mousavi's people, and they said what we'll do is that we'll check every single vote. We'll go to a number of provinces, and we are willing to check every vote.
But in a nutshell, sorry, I mean, do you actually think that it was rigged? I mean, if you put your hand on your heart, do you think there was any electoral fraud that took place?
No, I think it's far too complex for that to happen. There may be some votes here and there, but I don't think that 11, I think that would be virtually impossible.
So why do the Western sort of media seem to assume that fraud took place without perhaps necessary evidence to make that conclusion?